Well, hello and welcome. My name is Justin Fitzgerald, and I get to serve as the director of the Office for Service Learning and Civic Engagement. And we have a special little time here of talking to you about 3 best practices. So if you are a student watching this and you are about to dive into a semester-long service learning project for your class, we all teach service learning classes. And we thought it'd be great to just have a quick conversation about 3 best practices on how you can be as successful as possible in having that project start and end really well within 1 semester. And so I've introduced myself. I'm going to hand it over to my amazing co-hosts to also introduce themselves, starting with Jamie.
Thank you. I'm Jamie Wilson. I'm an adjunct professor. I teach a couple different service learning courses. Currently, I'm teaching Humanities 1931, which is Humanities and Social Issues that has the service learning component. And you may also see me this semester in Hume 1020, and alongside another professor, Miles Mancini. Another course that I teach that has a service learning component is the Fundamentals. What about you, Roberto?
Hey everyone, my name is Roberto Garcia. I am an instructor in the Department of Integrated Studies. I've been teaching here now, I think this is the start of my 5th year. And I've been doing service learning courses since the first semester I was here, so a while ago. So I do Foundations of Civic Engagement and I do Humanities and Social Issues. And service learning is such a great opportunity and I'm really glad that we're all here to chat about it today.
Awesome. So let's begin with the big one. I think it's like one of the most important ones, which is about communication. So we can talk about how you need to communicate well with your community partner, how you need to communicate well with your group if you're working with a group, and also communicate with your professor. So what do you guys think about that?
Well, I think that's the key right there is communicate. So if you're a student watching this, make sure that you are communicating with all 3 of those entities that Jamie just listed, because so many times we just kind of get into the groove of a project and we're doing our thing, or we have challenges and we're trying to work through it, but we forget to communicate to everyone around us. So that would be, I mean, that maybe that's too obvious to even articulate, but that would be the first thing. That's Roberto.
Yeah. I would say, you know, when you're communicating with your group, if you're in a group for the class that you're in, I know group chats, they tend to be where it's at, right? It's so lit in there, right? However, sometimes some people are not as lit. They're not partaking with, they're not engaging. They're not letting people know like, hey, I've read this, or hey, I got you, or I'll take that on. So when you're with your group, if you're in a group, make sure you're definitely communicating with them actively. Make sure you're letting them know, I've read this. I know we all have busy schedules. We all have a million things going on. I get it. When you take a service learning class, this becomes a priority. So make sure you're communicating effectively with everyone that's involved in your project.
What do you guys
sorry, Justin. I think too that having those clear defined roles in a group, so everyone knows what to expect of each other. And so if you're saying that, you know, person X is the one that's going to be reaching out to the community partner, I'd love for that person X to also CC every person in that group on that great email that you sent. Because if I ask person Y, hey, was that email sent and person X isn't in the class that day, we are missing a huge chunk of information. And also if your professor asks, I always ask to be CC'd on the emails as well, just because I can stay in the loop as the professor. And if the community partner has a question and you all are stumped, I can jump right in and answer that question quickly, effectively, and it saves everyone a ton of time going back and forth.
Yeah. So we've talked about communicating with your group, sort of mentioned communicating with your professor, making sure that they're in the loop. Let's touch on communicating with your community partner. So that initial reach out is probably where most students who are watching this now are at in the process. You know, one of the things that we know as instructors from doing this every semester is that our community partners really need assistance and really want assistance, but many times they're so busy they can't even get back to emails in a timely fashion and things. So what would you say to students who are not hearing back as they're reaching out and they're like, hey, can we work with you? Can we work with you? And they're excited. What would you say if they're not hearing back?
Well, I would say, sorry, Roberto, I would say the first thing to do is give them a time at the end of the email when you anticipate hearing back from them. So Hi, I'd love to hear back from you in 3 business days. If I don't hear back from you in 3 business days, I'm going to follow up with a phone call. So putting that intention right there in that bottom of that email, and then actually following up with a courtesy call, whether it being, hey, I just wanted to let you know that you have an email in your inbox from me. I mean, you may find out they have seen it, they just haven't replied to it. And we also have to be mindful that a lot of the community partners that have like a volunteer coordinator, especially at the beginning of each semester, they're just inundated with emails. So really think about how you can set your email apart, how you can make a phone call to make that connection. And I know Roberta and I talk about this. If you can't hear back from them and you know where they're located, it's okay to call that front desk, schedule an appointment with that person, or simply stop by with a printed copy of that email and say, hey, I just want to make sure this got into their mailbox. If they have a minute to talk, I'd love to chat with them.
Yeah, and I would just also just add professionalism, right? It's really, really important that regardless if you're communicating with your community partner, with your group, if you're in a group, or with your professor, is that you always remain professional, right? So just a standard email goes a long way. A nice introduction, a nice conclusion. It's going to be like, whoa, first impression. Okay, I want to work with you. So just put your best foot forward when you're actively reaching out to anyone.
Yeah, and I always share with my students, you know, it may seem like it's years away before you're going to be job searching, but it's really not. It's going to come very quickly. And these people, the contacts at the different nonprofits, they may be either at that organization where you're applying for a job or at a different organization that you can't even imagine right now that they're going to be at. And you may be interviewing with them one day, and they're going to remember this first impression that you had with them.
And you know what? I always like to tell my students, a lot of times our community partners already have great relationship with FGCU. I a lot of times have students who I hear back from them in email and saying, this was one of the best emails I've ever received, or, hey, I also graduated from FGCU. I'd love for you to come and work at our, you know, whatever it is that we're doing here. And that's huge. If you can right away say, I'm an FGCU student, and really kind of tell them ahead of time what you're looking for, then that sets you up for success throughout the rest of the time you're with them.
Excellent, excellent. So we've talked about communicating well. That's our first best practice. What's our second best practice?
So our second best practice is planning strategically. Just making sure you're going to be undertaking a project that's most likely going to last the entire semester. So the ability to sit down, look at everything, and make sure that you're taking into consideration all the moving pieces is incredibly important. So what tips and tricks would you all offer?
I say the realistic plan is great, but I also say to my students, you know, it's great to know what you love and connect that to maybe your passion, but also your future career. But more importantly, maybe what you don't love. Like I also tell students, like if you hate working with kids, don't seek out opportunities to work with the children, you know, give yourself opportunities. If you love marketing or if you really enjoy event planning and you want to work in hospitality and resort management, then seek out positions with community partners that you can build that repertoire so you can make connections in the field, but you can potentially have 4 years of experience sitting on your resume when you leave FGCU. I think that's a huge bonus that not a lot of people get to talk about.
I love
perks of service learning.
Yeah, yeah. I love to even say, like, if you think you love something, try it. Like, this is your chance to try it. So if you think you love the healthcare industry,
yeah,
like volunteer in it and make sure, because how many stories do we know where somebody thought they wanted to be a nurse and then they end up in a situation they're like, I absolutely don't want to be a nurse. This is not what I want every day.
Yes, that's so important.
So 100%. whether your instructor is having you do a really intense community engagement project all semester long, or it's just a short little go out and do something in the community, either format works really well for what we're talking about here. You know, find something you're passionate about, find something that connects to your career aspirations, and use this as an opportunity to dive in a little bit more and either confirm or deny what you think you want to do.
Yeah, totally.
What else do we want to say? Oh, I know we talked about flexibility. So when we're talking about setting a strategic plan or planning strategically, what would you say about staying flexible?
Y'all, It's going to be a skill that you are going to utilize for the rest of your life. So if you start using it now, it's going to help you out. Sometimes what you plan ahead of time, let's say you're doing a fall semester. So if you plan something at the start of August or September, things may be completely different by the time a pandemic, takes out everything. So make sure you're just being mindful that when something doesn't go according to plan, communicate with your professor, communicate with your community partner, communicate with any group members you may have, and you can create a new plan moving forward. It's not the end of the world. It's not.
And I think that goes back to professionalism too. We have this idea of how things are supposed to look, but I think Roberto used the word pivot earlier. It's this idea that it's a great career skill that you are able to reflect back on that and say, hey, I wanted to do these 3 things, but because of X, Y, and Z, I had to shift my idea. And this is what that came of it. And to me, sometimes when I'm looking at the outcomes that these students have, I am just in awe sometimes how people and community partners can work together and say, hey, we work together to solve this issue, going back to problem solving and critically thinking to overcome this issue and even have an even better project at the end of it.
Well, and I think one of the pieces that we should circle back to is that setting the objectives piece. Because if you set really good objectives that are, SMART goal focused and really cover the basis of like, this is the objective of what we're doing, then no matter what comes along the way, you can pivot as needed, like Roberto said, and still get to the end objective. So if your objective is to, educate people on what happens to litter when it goes, when it gets tossed out the car window. If your objective is to educate people, the pandemic doesn't change that. It just changes the way in which you educate people.
Yes.
So, always, every time you need to pivot, just go back to your objectives and say, okay, well, this path to get to that objective now has a barrier in the way. Let's find a different path to that objective. So setting those objectives is just
and oftentimes the community partner, they are the experts. So if you are encountering the issue, don't stew upon it, and feel like you're the only person who can solve this. Again, going back to communication, go to the expert in the field and say, hey, this is what I've encountered. What are your thoughts? What are your opinions? How can we solve this together?
Yeah. Great. So those are our first one was communicate well, best practice there. Another best practice was plan strategically. Our third and final best practice here for everyone is record everything.
Everything.
Like we're doing now.
Record it all. Really, truly though, you want to take pictures, you want to take video, you want with permission. You want to document everything, but especially talking about the service learning graduation requirement. This is a perfect opportunity to gather hours and track and record hours into Eagle Service Network and get it counted toward your graduation requirement. And so what advice or experiences have you guys had in your classes around tracking hours?
I often find students kind of lose hours, right? If they're not logging them, it's hard for you when you are trying to leave, right? You're trying to do your finals, you're trying to do all these things. It's hard to think about what happened in that second week of February. I cannot tell you what I did last February. And I'm certainly that if you wait to input your hours until your senior year of something that you did as a sophomore, you're not going to remember. So I really recommend anyone who's doing hours to keep a log, not just hours like 3 hours, but also some notes about what those hours encompass so you can refer back to those. And also your community partner is going to have to approve them. If you need to provide what you did, they may not remember either. So that is a win-win for both of you. And also making that set schedule, put it in your calendar that at the end of that semester, you're going to put your hours in Eagle Career so that you don't have to fumble for it. I've had students who I've had in 4 years ago that were trying to graduate who wanted to track me down to see if I could remember how many hours they had. It's hard. So keep in mind that as much work that you can do every semester, just put a plan in place that you're putting those in and that they are approved in a timely fashion.
Yeah, I think Jamie covered a lot of it. I mean, I always have, you did a great job. Typically it's just students at the end who You know, you get the heads up like, hey, you should start logging your hours. You should get your community partner confirmed. You should do all these things. But then at the end, it's like, it still hasn't been confirmed. They haven't responded to the email. What should I do? And I'm like, so for everyone watching,
we're okay.
Get it done early. Get it done early. Start logging them early. Start doing everything early. And just, you know, after you do all this, you get to put that on your resume. You get to put, after they've been confirmed, I completed 80 hours of service learning with FGCU. So then when you go to an employer and you're at a job interview and they're like, oh, what is the service hours? And you can tell them your story, and maybe it'll match up perfectly because it's the same SDG that you were interested in when you were completing your project, and that company directly is involved with that. So just everything that you're doing right now is hopefully going to launch you. So in order to launch you into your career, you just have to make sure you're logging, recording everything.
Soaring 4.
Soaring 4.
And also, Justin, your team has done an awesome job. I always send students over to your workshops where they teach you step by step how to log the hours. I physically take students through it. You even have a video of like a screen capture of physically going through it. So I think that you're kind of taking questions off the table. It's not so much how you do it, but remembering to actually do that. And if you're confused, the workshops are available to teach you how to actually input them.
Yeah, and if you are watching this and you're like, oh, when's the next workshop? You can go to the Office of Service Learning and Civic Engagement's Eagle link page and look at our events, and we have workshops offered all the time. And you know, like Jamie said, we'll walk you through the process during that workshop. What I will say is, if you are in a class and you focus on a project all semester long, we really encourage you, as soon as you've confirmed your partner, to do step 1 of the tracking process in the Eagle Service Network, where you submit the partner for approval, for university approval. So you don't want to get to the end of the semester and then submit your partner for approval. You really want to get that as soon as you pick your partner with your group or on your own and you're moving forward. And then at the end of the semester is when you would go back into the record in Eagle Service Network and track your hours all together. So if you're doing 10 hours a week, don't go in and put in 10 hours every week. Hold all those into like a log or a template, and then at the very end, put in 80 hours and get them all verified at once. And my big best practice that I'll share is, when you submit those hours to be verified by your community partner, when you put them into Eagle Service Network and it sends off that email to your community partner, that's the perfect time to also send your community partner a separate email that says, hey, I just submitted this. You should see an email soon asking you to verify these hours. And attached is everything that I did for you this semester.
Yes, and a big thank you, right? Yes, and that keeps your relationship going, especially if you enjoyed that time with them. I've had students that these situations have turned into real jobs for them, and that are paid. So I think it's really cool that if you could follow up, going back to communicating well, with a really professional email that explains that you'd love to continue working with them. And going back, we kind of glossed over this. I just want to say, taking pictures and video, I always tell students, show, don't tell. So especially if you're working on a semester-long project and you say, hey, we raised a certain amount of money and we gathered 72 pounds of food. I don't really know what 72 pounds of food looks like unless you showed me a picture of it. And yes, you showed pictures of you in action stacking the cans. If you showed us an action, you working. If there are kids involved, or if there is a population that is protected, obviously there are regulations in place to keep them safe. So you'll have to be creative in the way that you show those pictures. And maybe the kids' hands working on the craft, not their face, that you designed, the craft that you designed for them. So think about that from day one. When you walk in there, how can I show the story of this volunteerism, and how can I prove that the work I did met those objectives that you made when we talk about planning strategically?
Excellent. So our big 3 takeaways are: communicate well, plan strategically, and record everything. And so this video will live on the YouTube page for Service Learning and Civic Engagement. You can always come back to it. Hopefully during the Service Learning Fair, you're finding great partners, but if not, we also have a database on our website, and we, as an office, are always here to answer questions. Thank you to my co-hosts. Thanks for your insight and the courses that you teach and the way you integrate service learning so well. Thank you to the students who you're doing great projects out in the community and continuing to serve Southwest Florida so well. So thank you. Enjoy the Service Learning Fair and be well.